The galaxy had one rule. Every species knew it. Every empire followed it. Every child learned it before they learned to count the stars. The rule was simple. Never wake the humans. For 8,000 years, this rule kept the peace. For 8,000 years, the concord of 17 empires worked together to make sure no one broke it. They built warning stations around the yellow star. They sent patrol ships to guard the empty space. They taught their children stories about the sleeping monsters on the third planet from that distant sun, Earth. The word itself was enough to make grown warriors. Shiver Ambassador? Kethra of the Morvani Collective had heard the stories all her life. She remembered sitting on her mother's lap as a child, listening to tales of the human war. The war that lasted only 11 days. The war that erased an entire empire from existence. The Veth Dominion had been powerful once. They had conquered 600 worlds. Their fleets darkened the skies of 1,000 moons. They believed themselves to be the rightful rulers of the galaxy. Then they found humanity. Humans were young back then. They had only their homeworld and 2 small colonies. They were weak. They were soft. They needed to sleep for 1/3 of their lives just to function. The Veth Dominion looked at them and saw easy prey. They were wrong. No one knew exactly what happened in those 11 days. The records were incomplete. Some said the humans developed weapons that could tear holes in reality itself. Others said they simply refused to stop fighting, no matter how many of them died. But everyone agreed on what came after. The Veth Dominion was gone. Not defeated, not conquered. Gone. Every world they had touched was silent. Every ship they had built was dust. Every record of their existence was erased, except for the warnings the other empires kept to remind themselves what humans could do. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. They had never imagined that a species so small, so fragile, so seemingly harmless could hold such terrible power inside them. The surviving empires did not try to fight humanity. They did not try to conquer them or contain them. They begged. They pleaded. They asked the humans to stop, and the humans listened. Kethra often wondered what that conversation must have been like. The humans had just won the most one-sided war in galactic history. They could have demanded anything. They could have taken everything. Instead, they looked at what they had done. They were horrified. The humans proposed the Great Sleep. They would enter stasis. All of them, frozen in time until the galaxy truly needed them again. In exchange, the other empires would protect Earth, keep it safe, and remember the humans not as monsters, but as a warning. The Concord agreed. They built the stasis field around Earth. They created the Dead Zone, a region of space where no ship could enter. They wrote the one rule that would govern the galaxy for the next 8,000 years. Never wake the humans. Kethra had believed in that rule her entire life. She had dedicated her career to maintaining the peace it protected. She had never imagined that anyone would be foolish enough to break it. Then the report arrived. She was in her office on the Concord's capital station when her assistant rushed in, his face pale with fear. The Syndicate of Avaros had breached the Dead Zone. 3 ships had crossed the boundary and were heading toward Earth. Kethra felt her heart stop. The Syndicate was a mining corporation, one of the largest in the galaxy. Their CEO, Director Voss Talmaran, was known for his greed and his arrogance. He had been pushing for years to open the Dead Zone, claiming that the human threat was nothing but ancient propaganda designed to hoard resources. She had always thought he was a fool. She had never thought he was this stupid. Kethra immediately called for an emergency session of the Concord Council. But politics moved slowly, even in a crisis. Representatives argued about procedure. Senators demanded more information. By the time they finally agreed to convene, hours had passed. Then the transmission came. It arrived on every channel at once. It's broadcast from the Syndicate ships in the Dead Zone. The voice was shaking. The words were barely coherent. But Kethra understood them perfectly. The stasis field is down. They're waking up. They're all waking up. Then there was silence. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives screamed at each other. Some called for immediate military action. Others demanded evacuation of the nearest systems. A few simply sat in stunned silence. Unable to process what they had just heard, Kethra stood alone by the window, staring out at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the dead zone, 9 billion humans were opening their eyes for the first time in 8,000 years. They would be confused. They would be disoriented. They would want to know why they had been awakened, and then they would want to know who had done it. She thought about the stories she had heard as a child. She thought about the Veth Dominion, erased from existence in 11 days. She thought about the warnings her mother had whispered in the dark. The humans are not like us, her mother had said. They feel everything more deeply. They love harder. They hate harder. They fight harder. And when they are angry, truly angry, there is nothing in the universe that can stop them. Kethra closed her eyes and said a prayer to gods she barely believed in. She prayed for the galaxy. She prayed for the syndicate fools who had doomed them all. She prayed for herself and her people and every living thing that might soon face the wrath of the sleeping giants. The humans were awake, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the distance, warning lights began to flash across the station. Emergency protocols activated one by one. Ships launched from every dock, carrying refugees to safer systems. The Concorde was preparing for war, but Kethra knew that preparation was meaningless. If the humans wanted war, there would be no defense. There would be no negotiation. There would only be the same terrible silence that had followed the Veth Dominion. Into oblivion, she turned from the window and walked toward the council chamber. Someone had to try to reach the humans. Someone had to explain that this was not an act of war. That the Syndicate did not speak for the Concorde. That the galaxy had kept its promise for 8,000 years. She did not know if the humans would listen. She did not know if they would care, but she had to try. It was the only hope any of them had left, Commander. Alara Vance opened her eyes and saw only white light. Her body felt heavy, like she was made of stone. Her thoughts moved slowly, pushing through fog that seemed to fill her entire mind. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry and her lips would not move. Then the memories came rushing back. The war. The Veth Dominion. The terrible things they had done to win. The looks on her soldiers' faces when they realized what victory had cost them. The vote to enter the Great Sleep, to remove themselves from a galaxy that feared them, to give humanity a chance to heal from wounds they had inflicted on their own souls. She remembered the stasis pod closing around her. She remembered the cold spreading through her veins. She remembered thinking that she might never wake up, feeling relieved by that thought. But she was awake now. Alara forced herself to sit up. The stasis bunker was filled with activity. Hundreds of pods were opening around her, releasing humans who looked just as confused as she felt. Medical teams moved between them, checking vital signs and offering water to dry throats. Emergency lights flashed on the walls, painting everything in shades of red. A young officer appeared at her side. His name was Lieutenant Chen, and Alara remembered him from before the sleep. He had been fresh out of training then, eager and idealistic. Now he looked exactly the same, because for him, no time had passed at all, Commander, he said. We have a situation. Alara took the water he offered and drank deeply. Of course we do, she replied. What happened? Lieutenant Chen led her to the command center, where screens displayed information from around the planet. 9 billion humans were waking up across Earth. The stasis field that had protected them for millennia was gone. And in the northern region that had once been called Norway, a ship had crashed. Not a human ship. Something else. Alara studied the images. The vessel was clearly alien, its design unlike anything she had seen before. It had come down hard, leaving a trail of destruction through a frozen forest. But there were life signs inside. Someone had survived. Send a team, Alara ordered. Medical support and translators. I want to know who woke us up and why. The team found the pilot half dead in the wreckage. His name was Sorix, and he belonged to a species called the Morvani. He was young by his people's standards, barely more than a child. When the human soldiers approached his broken ship, he began to scream. He expected death. Every story he had ever heard told him that humans were monsters. Destroyers of worlds, the nightmare that lurked in the darkness between stars. He had been part of a syndicate expedition sent to test whether the legends were true. Now he was alone, injured, surrounded by the very creatures his people had feared for 8,000 years. But the humans did not kill him. They pulled him from the wreckage with gentle hands. They treated his wounds with care and precision. They wrapped him in warm blankets and gave him food that his body could digest. They spoke to him in soft voices, using translation devices to bridge the gap between their languages. Sorix did not understand. This was not how monsters were supposed to behave. Ilara arrived at the medical tent, where Sorix was being treated. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her people work. A doctor was arguing with a nurse about whether to wake the alien before his internal injuries had fully healed. A soldier was trying to figure out how to make the heating system more comfortable for a species that came from a warmer world. These were the terrifying humans that the galaxy remembered. These were the destroyers of the Veth Dominion. And they were arguing about blanket temperature. Ilara walked to Sorix's bedside. The young alien flinched when he saw her, pressing himself back against the pillows as if he could escape through the wall behind him. "I am not going to hurt you," Laura said. The translator turned her words into sounds that Sorix could understand. "Can you tell me what happened? Why are we awake?" Sorix stared at her with wide eyes. His species had 4 arms, and all of them were trembling. "You do not know? We have been asleep for a very long time." Ilara pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, putting herself at eye level with the alien. "We need you to tell us what is happening in the galaxy," slowly, haltingly. Sorix told her everything. The galaxy had changed in 8,000 years. The Concord still existed, but it was weaker than before. 3 empires had formed an alliance called the Trident Pact. They had been conquering neutral systems for decades, taking resources and enslaving populations. The Concord was too divided to stop them. The Syndicate of Averos was part of the Trident Pact. Their leader, Director Vos Talmaron, believed that the human threat was a lie invented by the Concord to control the galaxy. He had sent ships to Earth to prove that the sleeping monsters were nothing to fear. "He was wrong," Sorix whispered. "He was so wrong." Ilara listened without interrupting. When Sorix finished, she sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything she had heard. The galaxy had moved on without humanity. New powers had risen. Old alliances had crumbled. And now, because of one man's arrogance, Earth was awake again. "What happened to your people?" she asked finally. "The Morvani." "We stayed neutral," Sorix said. "We thought that would protect us. But the Syndicate wanted our mining worlds. They annexed our colonies. My family?" Sorix stopped, unable to continue. Ilara reached out and placed her hand over one of his. The gesture surprised them both. "I am sorry," she said. "That should not have happened to anyone." Sorix looked at her hand on his. He looked at her face, searching for the monster he had been taught to fear. He found only a tired woman with sad eyes and a heavy burden on her shoulders. "Why?" He asked, "Why are you being kind to me?" "My people sent ships to your world. We woke you against your will." Ilara smiled, though there was no joy in it. "Because kindness is not weakness. Because you are hurt and alone and afraid, and no one should face that without help. Because we spent 8,000 years dreaming of being better than we were." She stood and walked to the door. Before she left, she turned back to face him. "The species being conquered by the Trident Pact," she said. "Do they want to be saved?" Sorix thought of his home. He thought of his parents forced to work in syndicate mines. He thought of his sister, who had disappeared when their world was taken. He thought of all the people across the galaxy who lived in fear, because no one was strong enough to protect them. "Yes," he whispered. "They want to be saved. They just do not believe anyone will come." Ilara nodded. Her face was calm, but something burned in her eyes. Something that Sorix recognized, even though he had never seen it before. "Hope, then we have work to do," Ilara said. She walked out into the cold northern air, where the sun was rising over a world that had slept for 8,000 years. Around her, humanity was waking up, stretching muscles that had not moved in millennia, asking questions that had no easy answers. But Alara had found her answer. The galaxy was in pain. The innocent were suffering. The powerful had become corrupt. Humanity had slept long enough. It was time to remember what they were truly capable of. Not destruction. Not war. Something far more dangerous. Compassion with the strength to back it up. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. The humans were awake. The sleeping giants had opened their eyes. The one rule that had kept the peace for 8,000 years had been broken. And no one knew what would happen next. On 1,000 worlds, people prepared for the worst. Families gathered their belongings and fled to safer systems. Governments activated emergency protocols that had not been used in generations. Military commanders studied ancient records of human warfare, searching for any weakness they might exploit. They found nothing useful. The records all said the same thing. When humans went to war, they did not stop until the war was over, and their definition of over was absolute. Ambassador Kethra watched the chaos from her office on the Concord Capital Station. She had not slept in 3 days. Every hour brought new reports of panic, new demands for action, new accusations about who was responsible for this disaster. The Concord was falling apart. She did not know how to stop it. Then a message arrived from Earth. It was a simple transmission. It's broadcast on all frequencies. A single ship was leaving the human homeworld, heading for the Concord capital. The ship was called the Olive Branch. It carried a delegation led by Commander Alara Vance herself. The ship was unarmed. Kethra did not know what to think. This was not how the stories went. The humans were supposed to emerge from their sleep with weapons blazing, ready to destroy everything in their path. They were not supposed to send a single defenseless ship to talk. The Concord Council argued for hours about what to do. Some wanted to destroy the Olive Branch before it could reach the station. Others wanted to arrest the delegation and hold them as hostages. A few brave voices suggested actually listening to what the humans had to say. In the end, fear won out over wisdom. The council voted to allow the delegation to dock, but only under heavy guard. If the humans made any threatening moves, they would be killed immediately. Kethra was chosen to meet the delegation. She stood at the docking bay with her heart pounding in her chest, watching through the window as the Olive Branch approached. It was a small ship, elegant in its simplicity. It looked more like a pleasure craft than a vessel of war. The airlock opened, and Commander Alara Vance stepped onto the station. She was smaller than Kethra had expected. Humans were not a large species, but somehow Kethra had imagined someone more imposing, more terrifying. Instead, she saw a middle-aged woman with gray in her hair and lines around her eyes. A woman who looked tired and sad and determined all at once. Ambassador Kethra, Alara said, "Thank you for meeting with us." Kethra found her voice. "You should not be here. The council is afraid. They might do something foolish." Alara smiled slightly. "Then let us give them something else to think about." She walked past Kethra without waiting for permission, heading straight for the council chamber. The guards raised their weapons, but Alara did not even look at them. She moved with the confidence of someone who had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. The council chamber fell silent when she entered. 100 representatives from 100 worlds stared at the human woman who had just walked into their midst. Some looked angry. Some looked terrified. All of them looked confused. Alara walked to the center of the room and stood there, alone, surrounded by species that remembered her people as monsters. Then she began to speak. "We remember what we did." The words were calm and clear, translated instantly into every language in the room. "We remember the Veth Dominion. We remember the war that lasted 11 days. We remember every world we touched, every life we ended, every horror we committed in the name of survival." She paused, letting the words sink in. "We won that war. We defeated an empire that had conquered 600 worlds. We saved ourselves and everyone else that the Dominion would have enslaved. And then we looked at what we had done, and we were ashamed." The council chamber was completely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. We chose the sleep because we could not trust ourselves. We were afraid of what we might become if we stayed awake in a galaxy that feared us. We needed time to heal. We needed time to remember why we fight. Not for power. Not for revenge. Not for glory. We fight to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Alara looked around the room, meeting the eyes of representatives from species that had never seen a human face before. We have been awakened to a galaxy where the powerful prey on the weak, where empires are built on the bones of the innocent, where the Trident Pact conquers and enslaves, while the Concord argues about procedure. She shook her head slowly. We did not ask for this, but we will not turn away. She took a deep breath. To the Trident Pact, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber and beyond. To every ship and station and world that was listening. You woke us to test if the legends were true. Let us show you. The response came faster than anyone expected. Director Vostal Morin of the Syndicate of Averos had watched the broadcast from his flagship. He had laughed at the human woman's speech, calling it the desperate bluster of a dying species. The humans had been asleep for 8,000 years. Their technology must be ancient. Their military must be weak. This was the perfect opportunity to eliminate them once and for all. He ordered an immediate strike on Earth. 300 Syndicate warships entered the Sol system. They were the finest vessels in the Trident Pact fleet, armed with weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand the fury of a star. Director Talmaron watched from his command bridge, confident that he was about to make history. He was right, but not in the way he expected. The human ships emerged from hidden places throughout the system. They came from shipyards buried beneath the surface of Mars. They rose from the frozen oceans of Europa. They dropped out of hiding. Spots in the asteroid belt where they had waited for 8,000 years. There were only 47 of them. Director Talmaron laughed again. The odds were nearly 7-1 in his favor. This would not be a battle. It would be a massacre. The Battle of Sol lasted 6 hours. When it was over, every Syndicate ship was disabled. Not destroyed, disabled. Their weapons had been neutralized by frequencies they could not block. Their engines had been crippled by precision strikes that left the crews unharmed. Their shields had been bypassed by technology that the Syndicate had never imagined. The humans had not killed a single enemy soldier. Director Talmaron stood on his bridge, watching in disbelief as human Marines boarded his flagship. His elite guards fired everything they had at the approaching soldiers. The humans responded with weapons that simply made their targets fall asleep. Within minutes, the flagship was secured. Commander Alara Vance walked onto the bridge as Talmaron was being placed in restraints. She looked at him without anger, without hatred, without the burning desire for revenge that he would have felt in her place. You wanted monsters, she said quietly. You're something worse. She leaned close to him, close enough that he could see his own reflection in her eyes. We are patient, Talmaron said nothing. There was nothing to say. The galaxy watched in shock as the human ships began towing the disabled Syndicate fleet back to neutral territory. Every crew would be rescued. Every soldier would be given medical care. Every ship would be returned to its home port. This was not the humanity that the galaxy remembered. This was something new, something strange, something that no one had ever seen before. Power without cruelty. Strength without destruction. Victory without vengeance. Ambassador Kethra stood at her window, watching the broadcasts from Sol. She felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope the Battle of Sol changed everything. The Trident Pact, which had seemed invincible only days before, began to fall apart. The Helian theocracy was the first to break. Their religious leaders watched the broadcast from Sol over and over again, studying every moment of the battle. They saw the human ships spare every enemy life. They saw the wounded being treated with care. They saw power used with restraint and wisdom. This is divine mandate, the high priest declared. The humans have been sent to teach us the true meaning of strength. The Helian theocracy immediately sued for peace. They withdrew from all conquered territories and offered to pay reparations to the worlds they had harmed. Within a week, they had gone from conquerors to converts, building temples dedicated to what they called the human way. The Crick Swarm was next. They were a warrior species, raised from birth to believe that honor could only be found in combat. Death in battle was the highest achievement any Crix could hope for, but the humans had denied them even that. The Crix. Survivors of the Battle of Sol reported that they had been put to sleep like children and then returned home without a scratch. It was the greatest insult the Crix had ever received. It was also the most confusing. How could they hate an enemy that refused to kill them? How could they fight a species that treated defeat with kindness? The swarm mothers gathered in their ancient halls and debated for 3 days. In the end, they reached a decision that shocked the galaxy. The Crix would not fight humanity. They would study them instead. Perhaps this strange new form of strength had something to teach them. Only the Syndicate of Avaros remained defiant. Director Vos Talmaron had been captured, but the corporation's board of directors refused to surrender. They still controlled hundreds of occupied worlds. They still had millions of soldiers under their command. They still believed that the humans were a threat to be eliminated. But their allies had abandoned them, and their military was broken. The Battle of Sol had proven that human technology was far beyond anything the Syndicate possessed. A direct assault would be suicide, so the Syndicate waited and planned. It would watch for any opportunity to strike back. Meanwhile, humanity began its work. They did not demand surrender. They did not issue ultimatums. Instead, they started liberating Syndicate-occupied worlds one by one. Using the same tactics they had used at Sol, ships were disabled, not destroyed. Soldiers were captured, not killed. Infrastructure was preserved, not bombed into rubble. On world after world, the pattern repeated. Human forces would arrive, neutralize all resistance without casualties, and then begin the slow work of rebuilding. Prisoners were released from labor camps. Slave collars were removed and destroyed. Syndicate officials were arrested and held for trial. The trials were broadcast across the galaxy. There were no secret executions, no disappearances, no convenient accidents. Every accused had the right to defend themselves. Every accusation required evidence. Every verdict was explained in detail. Some were found innocent and released. Some were found guilty of minor crimes and given short sentences. Those who had committed the worst atrocities were given the longest punishments. Not death, not torture. Simply the requirement to spend the rest of their lives listening to testimonies from those they had harmed. The galaxy watched in confusion. This was not how empires behaved. This was not how power worked. Where was the revenge? Where was the cruelty? Where were the monsters? Ambassador Kethra finally requested a private meeting with Commander Vance. They met on a small station in neutral space, just the two of them, sitting across from each other in a room with no guards and no weapons. "I need to understand," Kethra said. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. "What happened to you? You were weapons of extinction? You erased the Veth Dominion in 11 days. Now you will not even kill your enemies in battle." Alara was quiet for a long moment. She looked older than she had during her speech to the council, as if the weight of the past weeks had aged her by years. "Let me show you something," she said finally. She activated a small projector and played a recording. It was old, the image grainy and faded with time. It showed a ruined landscape, buildings reduced to ash, the sky dark with smoke. Human soldiers stood in the wreckage, looking at something on the ground. Kethra looked closer and felt her hearts freeze in her chest. It was a nursery, a Veth Dominion nursery, filled with the belongings of children. Tiny beds, small toys, pictures drawn with clumsy hands, all of it burned, all of it destroyed. In the recording, a young human soldier fell to her knees and began to weep. Her rifle lay forgotten beside her. Her shoulders shook with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. "That was the last day of the war," Lara said quietly. "We had one. The Dominion was gone. And then we found this place, and we realized what we had done." She turned off the projector. "We won that war. We saved ourselves and everyone else that the Dominion would have enslaved. But we did it by becoming the very thing we were fighting against. We killed children, Ambassador, not on purpose, not with malice, but we killed them all the same." Her voice was steady, but tears were running down her face. We chose the sleep because we could not live with what we had become. We needed to dream. We needed to remember why we fight. Not for victory, not for power, for the children in that nursery. For every innocent being who just wants to live in peace. We dreamed of being better ambassador, dreamed of this moment when we would face that choice again and choose differently. Kethra said nothing. There was nothing to say. 8,000 years of dreaming, Alara continued. And now we are awake, and the galaxy is watching to see what we will do. She met Kethra's eyes. We will not become monsters again. Not for any reason. Not for any enemy. We would rather die than lose ourselves like that again. The meeting ended in silence. Kethra returned to the Concord capital with a new understanding of the species that the galaxy had feared for so long. They were not monsters. They were survivors. Survivors of a war that had wounded them so deeply that they had chosen to sleep for 8,000 years rather than risk becoming what they had fought against. She was about to share this understanding with the council when the news arrived. The Syndicate had made its move. A quantum bomb had detonated in a refugee camp on Kethra's own homeworld. 40,000 people were dead, including thousands of Morvani civilians who had fled from Syndicate-occupied territories. And the bomb's signature had been faked to look like human technology. The Syndicate was blaming humanity for the massacre. Kethra felt her heart break as she watched the footage. She saw the destruction. She saw the bodies. She saw the survivors screaming for help that would never come. The galaxy held its breath. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The humans had been pushed too far. Surely now they would show their true nature. Surely now the monsters would emerge. On Earth, Commander Alara Vance watched the same footage. She saw the death. She saw the lies. She felt the anger rise inside her like a wave that could drown the stars themselves, and then she made a choice. Humanity would not retaliate. They would not strike back. They would mourn. They would hold vigils for the dead. They would broadcast the names of every victim from every species, so the galaxy would know who had been lost. And then they would present the evidence. The real evidence, showing exactly how the Syndicate had manufactured the bomb and faked the human signature. The truth spread across the galaxy, like dawn spreading across a world. The Syndicate had killed 40,000 innocent people to start a war. They had blamed humanity for their own atrocity. The Concord did not just turn against the Syndicate. They joined humanity. For the first time in 8,000 years, the galaxy united. Not in fear. Not in hatred, in hope. The end came not with fire, but with silence. The combined forces of the Concord and humanity moved against the Syndicate's final strongholds. Millions of ships from hundreds of worlds flew together toward the same goal. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. It should have been the beginning of the bloodiest war the stars had ever seen. Instead, it was the quietest victory anyone could remember. System by system, Syndicate commanders surrendered without firing a shot. They opened their airlocks and lowered their shields and waited for the inevitable. But the inevitable never came. The human ships did not destroy them. The Concord forces did not slaughter their crews. Instead, they were asked one simple question. Do you want to help rebuild what was broken? Most of them said yes. The broadcasts from liberated worlds had shown them what awaited. They had seen former Syndicate soldiers working alongside the people they had once oppressed. They had seen prisoners released and given jobs helping to restore what the Syndicate had taken. They had seen justice delivered without cruelty, punishment given without hatred. For many Syndicate personnel, it was the first time they had ever seen power used for anything other than dominance. They had joined the corporation because they had no other choice, because the Syndicate controlled everything they needed to survive. Now, for the first time, someone was offering them a different path. The rebellion spread from the bottom up. Low-level workers stopped following orders. Mid-level managers began quietly sabotaging operations. High-level executives found themselves alone in their offices, abandoned by the very people they had commanded. When the human fleet finally reached the Syndicate capital, there was no one left to fight. Director Vos Talmaran was found sitting alone in his office. His guards had left him. His advisors had fled. His empire had crumbled around him while he watched, unable to stop it, unable to understand why. The humans came for him without weapons drawn. They walked through the empty halls of his headquarters, stepping over discarded uniforms and abandoned datapads. They found him staring out his window at a city that had once obeyed his every command. "You could have killed me," he said when Commander Alara Vance entered the room. His voice was hollow. He did not turn to look at her. "It would have been easier. It would have been faster. Why did you not just end it?" Alara stood beside him and looked out at the same view. The city was peaceful now. The streets were filled with people celebrating the end of the syndicate. From this height, she could see children playing in a park that had been closed to the public for decades, because easy is not the point. She said Tal Moran was given the same trial as everyone else. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He had ordered the deaths of millions. He had built an empire on slavery and suffering. He had detonated a bomb that killed 40,000 innocent people just to start a war. The galaxy expected execution. The galaxy expected blood. Instead, Talmaran was sentenced to spend the rest of his life on a rehabilitation station. He would be required to listen to testimonies from those his syndicate had harmed. Every day for as long as he lived, he would hear the stories of the people whose lives he had destroyed. Some said it was too lenient. Others said it was worse than death. Tal Moran himself said nothing. He had finally run out of words. With the syndicate defeated, humanity faced a new question. The galaxy expected them to take their place as the dominant power. Some even wanted them to. After everything that had happened, after everything humanity had done, there were many who believed that the galaxy would be better off with humans in charge. Commander. Alara Vance addressed the reformed Galactic Council with humanity's answer. "We did not wake to conquer," she said. Her voice was calm and clear, carried to every world by countless transmitters. "We did not wake to rule. We woke because someone needed help, and we were able to give it. That is all we have ever wanted. To be worthy of the stars we reach for." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from species that had once trembled at the mention of humanity. "So no, we will not lead you. We will walk beside you. And when darkness comes again, because it always does, you will not face it alone. That is our promise. That is our purpose. Not as your masters. Not as your monsters." She smiled, and for the first time since she had awakened, the smile reached her eyes as your friends. The chamber erupted into applause. It started slowly, just a few hands clapping, a few voices cheering, but it grew and grew until the sound filled every corner of the room, until it seemed like the whole galaxy was celebrating together. 1 year later, Sorix stood at the dedication of a new memorial on his homeworld. The planet had been free of syndicate control for 9 months now. The mines where his parents had been forced to work were closed. The camps where his people had been imprisoned were being converted into schools and hospitals. For the first time in his life, Sorix could walk the streets of his own city without fear. Beside him stood Commander Alara Vance. She had been given a new title now, Ambassador to the Concord. She spent her time traveling between worlds, helping to heal the wounds that centuries of conflict had left behind. She looked tired, but she also looked happy. Happier than Sorix had ever seen her. The memorial depicted 2 hands reaching toward each other across a field of stars. One hand was clearly alien, with 4 fingers and strange markings on the skin. The other was human, small and soft and fragile. The plaque at the base read a simple message. They were the galaxy's greatest fear. They chose to become its greatest hope. Sorix looked at the words for a long time. Then he looked at Lar. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "The sleep, the peace you gave up, the 8,000 years you lost." Alara did not answer immediately. She watched the children playing in the memorial gardens. There were children from a dozen different species running and laughing together. Morvani children played with Crick's children. Human children shared toys with Hellion children. None of them cared about the wars their parents remembered. None of them knew the fear that had once divided the galaxy. "Not for a second," Lara said finally. In orbit above the planet, a new ship was preparing for its maiden voyage. It was called the New Dawn, and it was the first civilian starliner built by the United Races of the Galaxy. Its crew came from 30 different species. Its passengers included scientists and artists and explorers from 100 different worlds. Its mission was simple: to find new worlds, to make new friends, to discover wonders that no one had ever imagined. The ship's captain was a young Morvani pilot who had once crashed in a frozen forest on a planet called Earth. He had expected to die that day. Instead, he'd found something he'd never known existed: hope. So Rix looked up at the stars and smiled. Humanity was awake. The galaxy was united, and the future stretched out before them like an endless ocean of light. For the first time in 8,000 years, no one was afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The sleeping giants had awakened, and they had brought the dawn with them.